We have these very comfortable lives in the city where we make sure the temperature around us is never too hot, it's never too cold, we get sleep when we need it. But on a bike, you feel things that you don't when you're doing your regular life. You can feel cold and you can feel hungry and you can feel sad. Like bonking is horrible, but it's also a gift because you can't just only feel good, happy things all the time. I don't think that's how we're engineered as humans.
From Escape Collective, this is Overnight Success, the podcast about the entrepreneurs, the personalities, and the passionate people who make up the sport of cycling and the stories behind the icons they've built. Apidura is a brand you may not be familiar with if you haven't ventured into the world of bikepacking, touring, or adventure racing. But they're pioneers in the rackless bags category and support the community of ultra cyclists and bikepackers. They're a brand at the heart of this rapidly growing community and are enabling a whole new wave of this type of cycling. Tori Fahey is the founder of Apidura and never set out to create a business out of her homemade bags and packs. She did it to satisfy her own needs with how she loved to balance her hectic life by doing long rides, tours, and adventures. What I find inspiring about what Tori's done with Apidura is not necessarily the business she's created, although it's pretty remarkable in its own right, but it's the foundation she's built the company on and the value she holds and follows through with. She's been outspoken about consumerism and the culture of seasonal discounting. She's conscious about the footprint the business leaves on the environment. She focuses her resources on making the product better rather than new colorways or seasonal changes. She made a deliberate choice at the start not to be a growth-led business, but to be a product-led business. That's one thing to say when you have a hobby business, but it's a completely different game when you have employees, a supply chain, and a customer base who depend on you. So without further ado, enjoy the episode.
I think my entry into cycling was fairly conventional in the sense that it started from quite a utilitarian standpoint. I first really had a bike for getting to work. You're from Calgary, so you know that the city's not really built for people who don't have cars. And a bike is a really, really important tool at a certain age to bridge the gap that there is in public transportation. So for me, for a number of years, a bike was quite a functional tool. I first got into more active cycling after I finished university, and when I first started working, I actually came in through triathlon, and I needed something intense. I started working in finance, and the schedule was quite intense. I needed something to basically match that to help me balance things out. Right. And after a while, I realized that I really, really enjoyed my time on the bike. I wasn't as into the running and swimming side of it, so I spent more time on a bike. My partner at the time was also getting more into bikes and joining the dead goats. After a bit of prodding, joined a club and tried a race and really loved the community, the cycling, like the club racing community.
It was a great racing?
Pardon me?
Mountain bike racing?
Starting with mountain bike and enduro style races. I knew, not having grown up as an elite athlete of any sort, my gift was suffering and staying in the game. I was never going to be a sprinter and the hot fast rider. So I took well to the longer races. Also, given the amount of driving that can be involved going to these things. If you're going to spend a few hours in the car, you might as well spend 8 hours on your bike. That's right. And I really enjoyed that. It was more time with friends, more time out doing something that was really fun. And I think like that was really exciting for a few years. Enjoyed that. Tried a bit of road racing as well. Cyclocross, loved that. It began to be something that I did. If I went to a conference for work, I would take my bike. My holidays were cycling. And it picked up over like year after year. I went a little bit deeper. And by, I guess, 2005, 2006, started getting into more touring and trying to extend what I could do with my bike. So at the start, it was fairly tame touring. Like Vancouver Island was my first trip. Spent a week going up and then down, and it's just a perfect spot for that sort of entry into it. And eventually it was something that almost pulled me away from Calgary and what I was doing, because I realized there was a lot to see and do on a bike.
And what were you doing for work at this time?
So I worked in finance a bit by accident. It's not something that was a natural career path for me. I was good at math, and I found business interesting. Was largely the pull in. My parents were educators, so even up until university, I had no idea anything about finance. And I was very fortunate to have joined a startup fairly shortly after school, with two of the brightest guys I've ever worked with, Vincent Chawley and Pentti Karkainen, who really opened up a world for me. It was it's a very different journey to join a startup than it is to go into a big company. I'd done internships at big companies before, which were great. There's lots of resources around, but at this small company, it was a really interesting experience because I could see how I could get exposure to just about everything. It was a matter of me stepping up to the opportunity, and also realizing that actually there's a lot of things that people don't know, and you just need to know how to go about the things you don't know. So I spent about 9 years with that business, and it was an extraordinary journey to where I learned a lot about finance, but also about working with emerging companies, and about doing things that were maybe outside of my comfort zone.
Right. And were you quite into this? Was it very interesting to you? Were you full on into it, or was your mind always wandering, thinking about cycling or maybe entrepreneurship, or what was your day-to-day like in your head?
To be honest, it's sounds a bit nerdy, but I loved it. I really liked what I did. And I remember a few years into it thinking like, wow, like I don't know that I'm ever going to do something else. I mean, there were ups and downs, as there are with every kind of career, but for the most part, it was a really cool job because basically, the first few years were a bit bumpier, but essentially we had startups come into the office and pitch their project, their business.
This
and
is
we
in
would
oil and gas.
Energy sector. It wasn't like exclusively oil and gas, but it's all energy related. That's Calgary.
That's Calgary,
but that didn't matter. I mean, actually, energy is an amazing business because you have perspective over the globe. Like geopolitical events impact the business. It gives you some sort of reach that is more broad than it initially looks like. It feels like a very specific sector, and some things are much more simple than like retail and FMCG businesses. But I was also somewhat interested in politics, so there was this sort of connection there that made it interesting. And what I enjoyed about it was, even if something was difficult with one of our portfolio companies, I would be meeting with a new team that was having a great time and was super excited about what they were doing. So it was like I had a dozen experiences. I was working for a dozen companies at a time in some way.
Yeah, wow.
Basically, I didn't explain what the business was, but we had a private equity fund that invested in energy sector startups. So we would select them, select specific startups for our portfolio, and then work with them. So there were there was just always something fresh and always
Right.
different things happening with the different businesses. And I really liked that for a period of time.
Okay.
And then at some point, probably a few years closer to the end, the lifestyle begins to be quite taxing because you're always on. It's really not a 9 to 5 job, which I don't think I would enjoy either. But at some point you need a bit of a breather. And through cycling, my curiosities about other places and people and ways of thinking had started to tickle my brain, and it just started to become a distraction. But the job itself I loved.
Yeah. Wow. So going on some of these long solo self-sufficient rides wasn't running from anything, so to speak. These weren't quarter life crisis periods. This was something that just balanced your life. Is that safe to say, or what was the attraction?
It was just time for something new. There's always I think one would be lying to themselves if they said everything in their life at any moment is perfect. So there's always things you're happy to leave behind. But it was really about a desire for something new and different rather than escaping something that was in my life at the time.
Right. So tell me about some of these big rides. How did you dip your toe into the water, and where did this lead in terms of the progression of these self-supported adventures you'd be doing?
So, as I mentioned, the first tour I did was on Vancouver Island, and it's relatively tame because apart from the north part of the island, you're never far from comfort. So if something goes wildly wrong, there's someone to pick you up, or there's a gas station to roll into. I was fortunate that it went very smoothly, so it perhaps gave me a bit too much confidence. My partner at the time and I then did a trip in Chile and Argentina, which was very different. But it ended up being a bit of a mix of, we needed to take a bus for part of it. Let's just say that. But it was a good adventure in terms of seeing stuff that you wouldn't see if you were with a guide or if you were driving a car, and just being able, not being on a prescribed route. And that again built my confidence. And the next thing I did was probably too far at the end of the spectrum. I thought, I'm going to ride from Inuvik to Skagway, Alaska. So I wanted to go from the Arctic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, which isn't a huge distance, but it's a very different ballgame than riding on paved or very nice gravel roads.
There's nothing out there.
Totally. I got up to Inuvik, and part of it was just, I had spent my whole life in Canada and hadn't seen much that wasn't really close to the border. I didn't really know my country, and this was a spot that had fascinated me. So I went up to Inuvik, had my very heavily loaded bike with panniers on the back and panniers on the front, and kind of a plan about what I was going to do. The plan was initially to get across the Dempster Highway, which goes down to Dawson City. It's sort of a engineering legend, this road, because it's built in very difficult on a very difficult landscape that changes with the temperatures. So for parts of the year it's closed. It freezes up in the winter, and then it's rideable in the summer. But on the shoulder months, it's basically impassable. And because it goes from freezing to not freezing. It's a gravel road. It just wouldn't work with a paved surface, and the texture of the gravel is quite variable. I was mostly prepared for that, other than my 23 mil tires. I wasn't. My wilderness readiness was really not there. I was fortunate that I didn't have any wildlife encounters other than clouds and clouds of mosquitoes. But I think I went in July, so it was close to 24 hours of daylight. And I remember sleeping in my tent with the tarp off so I could see if anything was coming. And it's a sort of road that so few people pass. You can ride for hours without seeing a car, which is amazing, but also terrifying because if something goes wrong, you need to be able to figure stuff out. And at that point in time, I don't even think I could have fixed my chain if it broke. So it was a good wake up call because I realized that I needed to be more prepared for the places I went. But I also realized, if you're careful, it's also possible to do quite a few things with your bike and on your own, and you can find solutions along the way.
Would you just pick up a book and say, hey, this former person has done this before, I'd like to do this? Or, I mean, the internet was quite prominent at 2008-ish, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. Yeah.
But still finding, I guess there is only one road, so it's...
Yeah, I wasn't worried about getting lost. I definitely wasn't worried about getting lost. There was a site, and it still exists, Crazy Guy on a Bike, where you can read like logs of the journeys people have done. I would say my preparation and research was relatively light. I probably didn't exhaust all the resources out there. There wasn't. I had a map, and I had a good idea that I could survive on my bike for quite a distance if I'd run out of water and food. So I just had, I guess, confidence in myself to get where I needed to go. I didn't know everything on the route. I basically had planned where I would stop, marked the resource points. But embarrassingly beyond that, I didn't have a lot of preparation. But then again, even in the subsequent tours I've done, other than in Pakistan, I haven't spent a lot of time to plan things out because nothing ever goes to plan. Sometimes it rains. Sometimes there's construction. Sometimes there's something cool at the side of the road that grabs your attention and it takes you in a different direction. So prescribing the plan in too much detail hasn't really served me well or been necessary.
Yeah. What would you think about during weeks on end of being alone and by yourself and that, or did you bump into lots of people? Probably not up north in Canada, but
well, to be honest, I bumped into one other rider, and do you know where he was from? He was from Calgary.
No, from Calgary. I was going to say, was it Swain Tuft? Because that sounds like something he would have done.
Yeah.
Do you know Swain Tuft? Do you know that name?
Of course.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know him personally. Not fast enough to know him personally, but certainly know him by name.
Wow, another one from Calgary up there.
Yeah. What did I think about? I mean, I think that's probably what I enjoyed the most about it. I thought about things that I just never took the time to think about when I was in the city. We have these very comfortable lives in the city where we make sure the temperature around us is never too hot, it's never too cold. We get sleep when we need it. If we're bored, we put on the music or pick up a book. But on a bike, like especially some of the long roads, you've ridden around Calgary too. Sometimes you have these prairie roads where it's a lot of the same.
Dead straight.
But it's amazing, and you can either look at it and say like, "Oh, this is boring." I personally don't listen to music when I ride, so because I like that it forces me to go past this weird, uncomfortable spot and just think about things I never allow myself to think about. Whether it's like reflecting on a memory or a relationship with someone, or maybe even a story I've read. It just to actually spend the time and reflect on it instead of rushing through it. I feel it's like a really peaceful, noiseless time where you can reflect on what you think about something, or how you feel about something. And it's especially so because you feel things that you don't when you're doing your regular life in the city. You can feel cold and you can feel hungry and you can feel sad. Like bonking is horrible, but it's also a gift because it's it's normal and really healthy to feel things feel strong things. You can't just only feel good, happy things all the time. I don't think that's how we're engineered as humans. I guess we're
Is
not.
that a thought that's formed throughout cycling, or is that something you've sort of had all your whole life? Just
No, it's definitely through cycling. I don't think you would anticipate that sort of experience. It's something that comes from like the really long rides, and it's probably also why I'm drawn to the really long rides, because there's something quite relaxing and settling about a long ride when you come back. Of course, you feel tired, and you could say that's settling. I just mean psychologically settling. It's it's like a therapy. Even if you don't think you need it, it helps a few things connect in your brain in the same way as a good sleep does. But you, instead of having your eyes closed, you get to see the world around you.
Yeah. Had the thought of becoming an entrepreneur and doing your own thing occurred to you at this sort of time of doing some of these long solo rides before you stepped into the racing side of it, like the Tour Divide? Before that, did anything occur to you that you'd be here right now?
Not at all. I always like to play with different ideas, and because of my prior experience in finance, I loved modeling stuff. I loved figuring out what could work, or how different scenarios that could work. But that 9 years was also, I ended up being one of the founding shareholders, and the experience I had from that was that I did not want to start another business. So I wasn't dreaming about, I want to do it again, and I want to where's my idea? I wasn't in search of an idea at all. Right. It's the thing about building a business, as you probably know, is it's quite all consuming. So you need to be really serious about it to go for it. And if you're not, it's probably not going to work. And if you're not, or if you're not and you put yourself into it anyway, you're probably going to be miserable, because if you want it done well, you're going to end up spending all your time doing something that you don't love. So I wasn't searching for an idea to get started again. This really came about. Apidura really came about over a long period of time. There was not a day where it was like, let's try building this business, or can we make it work that way? It's a bit strange that even after some time working toward it, I hadn't sat down at my computer and tried to model out, can this work financially? I just didn't do that. Like, up till the first sale, that hadn't been done. Which it's just a testament to how it was really a product-driven exercise. This, from the start, was, I want something different. To build what I need, to build what I want, I need people and machines that can do something that I cannot do personally. And it was a bit of an experiment, and an exploration about what was out there. Time on the bike, testing things, thinking about things. The Tour Divide was my first foray into rackless carry, and it's a lot of time on a bike. I mean, for me, it was 24 days, and
sorry to interrupt. The Tour Divide was when, 2012?
2011. I went back in 2012 with some friends to make peace with the route. But 2011.
Did you finish in 2011?
In 2011, yes, I finished.
You finished it. Fantastic. And okay, so that's not a ride that you can put panniers and racks and stuff on your bike. You need a mountain bike. And how did it start forming that, okay, well, this is the equipment I need, and where do I buy this? Because it doesn't really much exist yet commercially. How did that start forming for you, and what did that represent in your journey this time?
Sure. Yes, that's right. It was a quick realization that I came to, that I was quite ill-equipped for this. I'd heard about the Tour Divide for a few years, but not done any kind of digging into if I did it, how I would do it. And I had just come back from 4 months in Africa. So physically I was quite strong. I'd been riding, and I was like, actually, I'm back, and the divide is in 10 days. The Grand Depart is in 10 days.
and this the Africa one was that was supported. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
4.5 months.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a funny one. Like we met a lot of people along the way who were trying to ride it on their own over the course of like a year or 2 years. And I think it would be a very crazy journey on your own. You can do it Mark Beaumont style in 66 days, with a team, and that's one thing. But to do it fully self-supported it's really an incredible feat.
What was your situation? How did you do it?
So there's a Canadian company called the Tour d'Afrique. It was something I'd read about probably 7 years earlier, about a couple of guys from Canada riding the length of Africa. And at the time I was like, wow, you could do that? Like 12,000 kilometers. That's epic. And so it had stuck in my brain that like, maybe one day I would do something like that. And the opportunity had come up. I had just finished business school and my personal circumstances changed, and I had a bit of time to play with. So I was like, well, I'm going to do that now. And the fact that it was supported made a lot of things logistically easier. And I could just focus on riding. So there were 14 of us that went the full way every inch.
How many K a day would that have been? Or how many hours a day?
On average, it's 120 a day. So, but it varies quite a bit. So in Ethiopia, there are some shorter days and Tanzania is like muddy. Ethiopia is hilly. Then Botswana is like dead flat. So you have big mile days, but they're not necessarily harder. You've got buttery.
And you'd have a van or something that would bring all your stuff, and you just have it in the back of your jersey, or maybe a backpack or something like that.
Exactly. And then camp at night. Yeah.
Right. So did that feel a bit disconnected to the stuff you had done, like some of those big tours you had done in the past? And then how did Tour Divide come up?
I wouldn't say it felt disconnected. There was, especially going through places where you may be unfamiliar with food, and how to handle food, and just making sure that you're staying healthy along the way. Even for across the 4 months with support, I was quite sick for a month. So it didn't feel awkward to have support. It felt a bit awkward to have that many people around at times. But then it was also really helpful sometimes to have that, because one difficult thing with touring is if it's not a shared experience, it's like something is lost, I think. But certainly at the end of it, I was really craving an individual solo experience. And so the Tour Divide seemed like this perfect thing. I'd been sleeping in the dirt for 4 months, and it felt really awkward to have flush toilets and sleep in a bed. So get me back there. I was ready to continue riding. And I thought I was really ready for some time alone. So I was really looking forward to that. And you
weren't exhausted 10 days later after 4.5 months. You weren't exhausted, or you just felt on top of the world at this point?
So ultimately, it was about 3 weeks between the finish of one and the start of the other. It's just that I made the decision effectively 10 days before the Grand Depart.
Okay.
I was tired for about 3 days. The thing when you ride for 4 months, intensely for 4 months, and whatever training was leading up to the start of it, your body just gets used to recovery. Like my nails were growing faster. If I cut myself, it would heal in a day. It was like I was a kid again. Right?
Wow.
Yeah. Your hormones just get going. And I really didn't feel the fatigue. Although I did after the Tour Divide. I only probably a month after the Tour Divide that I just couldn't do much more than get out of bed.
Yeah, I bet. What was your preparation from an equipment standpoint? Because you had clearly already done the physical part of it. From an equipment standpoint before Tour Divide, how did you start making the realization that my current setup isn't going to cut it from what I've done previously?
Sure. Yeah. I was lucky. I have a friend in Calgary who was really into the divide and has a very different approach to preparation. He's like really, really, really into the details. So I was fortunate to have this connection who helped point me in the right direction for certain types of resources. Also, I grew up across the street from Bo Cycle. And
really?
this was also
wow.
This was also a really important resource point. My boat from Africa was on a boat coming back, so and my bike from Africa was on a boat coming back. So I needed to build a new bike for this, and they were really helpful in sort of helping me get the pieces together in time, and then down to equipment. Like, this was something that really came together last minute, partly through my friend Craig Stepler, helped connect me with some used equipment, and also just hacked a few things together. Like duct tape goes a long way. It was not a beautiful sight. My first go at it, but it was hugely liberating because just the ride itself. If you don't have to take a rack and you don't have to take the boxy panniers, you're saving like 2 kilograms, and you can spread it across your bike. So the ride handling is amazing. And in this case, I had it on a hardtail. So it also meant I had
these are mountain bike trails, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah. They say it's like 80% off-road, the route, but realistically, some of it's just gravel that's off-road. But there are like more technical sections that I think are a lot more comfortable on a hardtail.
So did you just go to MEC or to Bo Cycle and just go and buy some rackless bags, or did you have to make these, or what was your setup like? How did you?
This was something that you couldn't buy off the shelf at the time. This was 2011. So at the time there's a company called Revelate based in Alaska who was making stuff. And there was a guy in California. Of course, I had left it very late. So also at the time, stocking was an issue for these guys. So they may have existed, but getting your hands on gear was very difficult. And especially if you have a smaller bike, there were limited options for someone with a smaller bike. There was a local guy, at the time he was in Canmore, called Porcelain Rocket, Scott Felter at Porcelain Rocket. And it was actually his secondhand gear that was formed a good part of what ended up being my Tour Divide rig.
And it was just a game changer for you, the way it was all distributed on your bike and what you could ride with it and that? Is it?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, the other thing is like, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but bikepacking.net is a good source. That at the time, that was basically, if you wanted to do the Tour Divide, this is where you go. And there's a lot of do-it-yourself stuff. So, and even at the start line, most people were, or not most people, there were a lot of people who'd built their own, like fully their own gear. That just within the first few kilometers started to fall apart. I had a few things I'd put together myself, but I was fortunate that I had this combination.
And at that point, did you start thinking, I could do this better, or maybe there's a market opportunity, or how did that start? That seed start become planted? So,
I think it was something along the way. I was like, wow, this is cool, but I would like to change this and this and this and this. So it wasn't about the market opportunity. It was just, this is how I'm going to tour every time from now on. I'm never going back to panniers. 2, I'm definitely doing this again. 3, I have some work to do to make this better for next time. There were people I met along the way, even though I think there were like 50 people who did the Grand Depart. You see very few of them out across the 200 kilometers. But you see other people touring, and like everybody I ran into was like, oh, wow, that's a good idea. Really? Where can I get that? So it was clear that like I was not the only one who thought this was a good idea. And I subsequently did a few other tours, just more relaxed tours, and it was just itching in my brain that I went back and tried the Divide route again with some friends in 2012, a bit more recreationally. They needed gear, and it was just really frustrating how impossible it was to get stuff, let alone then tailor it to exactly how I thought it should be. I thought it should be more than just like crafts that you do at home, something that you sew on your own machine. There's nothing wrong with that, but I felt that for all of the attention I put into my bike, deciding on the spokes, deciding on the headset, the cranks, blah, 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 you go into every detail, and then you're going to throw on crafts to help you in the wilderness. Of course you can do better than that. So I thought if you can bring in some modern manufacturing capabilities and more professional design, you can make this so much better. You can. It just felt like there were so many possibilities, and that's what when I started to spend more time doing it. But still, it wasn't necessarily with a business in mind. Even up to the first time we every step you take, you get a little bit farther down a path, and you don't really realize when you take the approach in the way that I did. You're not quite sure where this path leads, but you go because it's interesting and you want to know what's around the corner. So I was less focused on what was on the other side as what was 10 meters in front of me, and never really got too consumed about anything more than that, I guess.
So what did you start doing? Did you start you go onto the crafts table and gluing and sewing stuff together to make it either better or
I
what did that look like to you?
I played around with a few things myself. My mom had bought me a sewing machine a number of years earlier, so it was something that was relatively straightforward to start toying around with stuff. I also had there was a outdoor provisions shop in Calgary that also produced things for the military, and I had taken a few things to them, like for the Tour Divide, I wanted a hood on my rain jacket. And so I needed a zip cover on my bivy sack. So I'd asked them to do a bunch of stuff previously. And I thought, okay, these guys, they do stuff for the military. So this is perfect. And they're just down the street. Although I was living in New York at the time, it felt at least there was a connection. But it was really frustrating because actually it still wasn't what I thought I could get. And I tried probably half a dozen different places. I tried another place in Calgary and then looked in Europe, because by the time I got to there, at that point, I had moved to France. And the journey was not definitely not a straight line. It was clear that I could do a model of what I needed, but to take it to the next step required machinery, something to precision craft it, something to take it beyond handcrafting, but take it to precision crafting, and get someone, not a hobby sewer or not a hobbyist, but a professional welder or professional seamstress to do the fine details that I needed. Because after all, this was something that I relied on in the wilderness. So it needed to meet a certain standard. It needed to be worthy of the bike that I was putting it on. Does that answer?
And this is just, absolutely. And this is just for a market of one, and that's you, that in your head. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, it's me and everybody I would like to ride with. And, probably, if I end up making more than that, there will be others who are interested. So, there's no, I know that there's going to be someone who will be interested in what we make. But I wasn't necessarily thinking of it as could this be for the world? Could this occupy me full time, and now my husband full time, and a team of we're now 16.
So what did that look like for you coming into 2013 when Apidura was born? What did you have a product to sell? What was that first product and how did it come about?
So we started with 3 products. It was a saddle pack, a handlebar pack, and then a product like a little pocket that went on top of the handlebar pack. And it was really based around my Tour Divide setup. This was what I had ridden with. I had come off of testing. My husband and I rode from Istanbul to Paris in like the summer of 2013, testing out gear. I did a long trip in Central Asia in September of that year. Testing everything out, and we were ready to press the button. I remember like the first order that we did was for 300 pieces, and we were like, "Are we ever going to will we even be able to sell that?" And we were so unprepared because we had been really focused on the product and not thinking about the whole ecosystem around it. And like, okay, how are we going to sell this? Okay, we need to get a website together. Okay, we need to, everything else was just this mad catch up, trying to fit all the pieces around the product that we'd been focused on. So that's essentially what it looked like. And probably, given the reaction we had when we placed our first order, that was, if I'd realized what I would have needed to invest at the start, if I'd done the business planning that I probably should have, given my background, given that I enjoyed doing that in the first place, I probably would have never stepped down the road because I was, I think, quite naive about actually how I felt it was a product everyone could use, but there was a long way to go from, okay, this is something that anybody who uses panniers is going to enjoy this more, to if nobody knows it exists, how do you even get to the point of getting it on their bike? So I hadn't looked that far down the road yet to see that the opportunity is actually quite enormous. And the fact was, we were launching this in 2013, 2014, when people are using the internet, and actually you can do a direct-to-consumer brand. So you can speak directly to customers around the world. In the first year, we sold to 31 different countries. So of course, there's at least 300 people who can use this. Of course.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was not totally clear. We actually, although we launched direct to consumer, we were also aware that shops would play an important role. For me, BowCycle had played an important role in helping me understand how to fix my bike. I took mechanics course in the winter with them, and they helped me understand what products were out there. They educated me and did that huge job at the start. And they also do a lot of community building, putting on races and so forth. So it felt for us that shops were an important part of it. Nobody's going to know to look for this stuff on the internet if they don't know it exists. So of course you need it in a shop. And that's something that's grown as well alongside, I guess. We weren't doing that out of the gate.
This podcast is fully funded by our members at Escape Collective. In fact, all of our content on our website and our podcast network is 100% supported by our members who believe that cycling media should be independent from the sport and industry we cover, and that we should exist to serve you rather than live or die by our ability to be a platform for the sole purpose of selling you more stuff. If you enjoy this podcast or any of our other work and believe in our mission of independence, please go to escapecollective.com/join and become a member today. Thank you for your support. How were you living at this time? You know, you said you went on a couple big tours testing out your equipment. You would have had to get proper assembly and production. How were you living and paying for this at the time?
So I left Calgary and I left my job in finance when I was 31. So I had a few years under my belt, a fairly modest lifestyle. It gave me a bit of running room to not rush out and get a job. And at the time, like when we started the business, my husband was still working. So that made it a lot easier for me to focus on starting the business and not worrying about bringing in a salary.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And so you had no business plan, no go-to-market plan, really. Like how did you sell? What was the first unit you sold, and how did that sell?
The first unit we sold was a saddle pack to an Italian fellow whose name I won't say, but whose name I remember because we had just put the site live a couple of weeks earlier, and we're just still catching up with all the infrastructure that we realized we needed to have in place. So we had put the site.
You get this website up, and then what? Like,
honestly, 24 hours later, there was a forum in Finland, and somebody had posted it there, and I hadn't told anybody because we were still trying to figure out how to get everything together. So we got pulled into a vacuum at the start. We were super lucky. We got pulled into a vacuum at the start. And it just started running without us in some ways. So the first couple of years were really catching up and doing the building work that we would have done if we looked at this as a business at the start. But really at the start, this was all about product. The 2014 was a big year for us because of course, Mike Hall and Juliana Buring did the inaugural Trans Am bike race in June. They were using our gear, and then I got an email from a guy named Christoph Allegaert. I hadn't heard of him because honestly, the year before when he was riding the first transcontinental, I was riding effectively the same route, but Istanbul to Paris, not quite the same route. But in the other direction and recreationally. So I get this email from Christoph, and I think it has to be a typo. He says like, last year I rode from London to Istanbul in like 7 days. And I'm like, okay, he's missed a number here. And then I looked into it and like, wow. So it was amazing because he was
this guy. Yeah.
He wasn't looking for sponsorship. He had just like seen that Mike had been using our gear and wanted some more information because he had some things he wanted to improve on his setup. And then he ended up using our gear in the TCR that year. So it was a huge breakout first year for us, on top of like going into a situation where I think there were people who in 2011, like me, wanted gear but couldn't get it. There was all this existing community of people who were ready for it. And then on top of that, you had these exciting races, like the Trans Am was new, the TCR was in its second year, and that was just building the community. And we were fortunate to be the product of choice for a number of riders. And then October of that year, actually, Rafa called us to do a collaboration. So it was a massive first year, and it just meant a lot of catching up. So we started building the team in 2015. At this time, Pierre, my husband, was still working, but we just really went full on in trying to build the system around us and put together a proper plan.
So the timing couldn't have been better with the formation of this type of racing and riding and
absolutely,
and all that.
yeah.
And yeah, right. And were you exposed to that through Tour Divide, or is this kind of like happening without your knowledge? Did you have your ear to the ground on that community?
Yeah, I definitely had my ear to the ground on that community. I think I didn't realize that it was as popular in Europe as it's proven to be. I guess it's always the case coming from North America. There's its own community, and bikepacking.net, for example, is quite a North American audience. So I didn't have my ear to the ground in Europe. And although I was still connected with the community, I was not necessarily, I didn't feel that was the be all and end all. In some ways, it was something that bothered me about it was that it was quite exclusive. It felt quite exclusive, that there was, you needed to know somebody to even know that it existed. And one of the things I like about cycling is it should be very inclusive. It is very inclusive. Everybody can ride a bike, and this particular kind of touring, I didn't think that what we made needed to be exclusive. I wanted it to be something that was accessible to everyone. And that meant not just like making it available, but also trying to think about what we did as not just a physical product, but all the things around it, all the knowledge. So we have invested a lot on the digital product, which is like our blog, building knowledge, building awareness, sharing inspiring stories, so that people can see the bridge from where they are into the sport, and it's not just this like hidden exclusive community on an old forum somewhere.
Yeah. Tell me, just moving back a little bit. So you started Apidura. You were in London at that time, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. So the whole starting story. No, it's true. The starting story is a bit jumbled because I think largely related to my experience of cycling and feeling like I could be anywhere and just roll with the punches. I had started work on this effectively when I was living in New York, subsequently moved to Paris. And then when I moved to London because Pierre got a job here. And that's probably also what helped us take it seriously. Moving here meant I needed to get a visa. And that meant, and I took an entrepreneur's visa. So I had to make this real.
Right. Okay. Yeah,
sometimes you get a little kick in the butt. That's an external kick in the butt, and it makes it happen.
Sometimes that's what it takes. Yeah. And tell me the story about the bumblebee on your logo. Where did that come from?
Sure. So the story is supposed to be that so Apidura. The word Apidura comes from two Latin words: Apidae, which is for the bee family, and durabilis, which is lasting. And I felt that the bee is a nice symbol for cyclists because we are independent and social. We travel fast and far. We're light. There's in my opinion, a lot of strong connections there, and durabilis because also as cyclists, if this is around endurance riding, we go far, and this was something that we wanted to be durable and lasting. The real origin.
Did you find that? How? Sorry to cut you off. How the heck did you put those two together? Like out of every Latin word out there, like was it?
Well,
were you just starting mixing and matching things, or?
There was a lot of that, to be honest. It's a funny game to come up with a brand name now. I think anyone who has not started a business or has not started a brand may not appreciate the difficulty in it. But we knew we wanted to be able to own the domain name and to not have problems trademarking. And I know from listening to some of your other interviews, like Rafa has its own story on the trademarking, and Canyon with the domain name and trademarking. So it was something that it was at least on our radar that we couldn't just pick a name like an obvious word out of the air because it's not the Wild West anymore. Most of the real estate has been taken up. So if you don't want to buy your way out of that situation, or if you don't want to, if you want to avoid conflict, you need to come up with something new. So we, and coming from Canada, one of the brands that I find most inspiring is Arc'teryx. And so for me, this was an example of that word didn't exist before. Actually, that brand name is incredibly complex because nobody knows where to put the apostrophe and you don't quite remember how it goes. But basically, you can make up something that you connect with. So we just said, okay, well, what are some words that we associate with this? And the bee itself, I had a connection to, not just because of the description I had about how it represents cycling well, but when I first started club racing, I was older, one of the older people getting into it for the first time. And I was quite nervous. And so I wore a bee costume. And that became associated with me. So I felt connected to the bee.
That's awesome. That's great. And it's very clever too, because I can, from the second I saw Apidura, I remember the name. Often like Arc'teryx, for example, I didn't remember that the first time I saw it. It didn't just pop out of the logo, the phonetic, and just to memorize it. Plus, consumer direct business, you need the domain name, right? So
Yeah.
lots going on there that you got around. So well done. And geez, you used to dress like a bee. That's awesome.
It's like I think it's one of the best decisions I made aside from joining the Dead Goats, was to do this because basically everybody cheers for you. Everybody, even the people who are passing you.
How could you not? That's right. That's hilarious. So, you alluded to everything you had to think about that you didn't necessarily think about, like, everything from when it gets to be more do or die, like managing cash flow, and you could very easily go broke while trying to get the product and all that. Was that something your finance background really helped you navigate? Marketing too, like you have, from what I've seen and listened to, a very good brain for marketing. How did you get all these skills, and how did you manage all these different skill sets that you needed to bring together?
So on the cash side, it is an interesting situation to be in because it's a very cash intensive business. And actually you can grow and put yourself into the hole because basically we need to do all the research ahead of when we sell stuff. We need to buy all the materials and build everything and pay for it like 6 to 9 months before we can sell the first product. And that's not a small thing. And if you're growing fast, it's very easy for demand to get ahead of where your resources are. And so it was a bit of a learning for me. I think we were very scrappy in how we approached the business. We did a lot of things that because we funded the business ourselves, we didn't have the luxury to say, okay, I'm going to take an office. Like we ran this from our kitchen at the start. We did photo shoots literally in the kitchen with toilet roll and bed sheets. And a really brilliant graphic designer who takes good shots and knows Photoshop. He's just absolutely incredible. But there are a lot of things that we didn't spend money on at the start. And I think that saved us and helped us get through the first few years of growth. Sorry about that.
Right.
And I think like it's always going to be a problem. This industry as a whole is a graveyard of brands that have buried themselves because it's not easy. It's really, really not. There's the expense associated with things that you don't even expect, like trademarking. Even if you go in with a good plan and don't take a name that's already been claimed, you can still run into problems, and it's still expensive, especially if you like to own it globally. It's an unbelievable amount of money to go after that. And when you're just starting out and you don't know whether it's going to work, you can easily, even if you're smart about it, spend more on that than you're spending on the product itself. It's crazy. It's a huge barrier to building and owning your creation. Like building a business and owning the creation that you've worked so hard to make. So I think having a finance background helped a lot because I was conscious, having seen companies that I had invested in previously where they went wrong. We were very conservative on a lot of things. We made a point not to be ultra aggressive. We took a very deliberate approach to how we built the business, but we were not pursuing growth at all costs. And that was one of the luxuries we afforded ourselves by financing the business ourselves and keeping and growing this organically, that we were not going to be growth led. I think if we had been growth led, then we would have we could have hit a wall. But we were very focused. Go ahead.
Sorry, that was a conscious decision not to take an outside investor or anything like that at first, and do this completely on your own, just from what you've seen before, right?
Absolutely. It's a strange position to take because on the one hand, I come from a background where I have seen the value of outside capital and the impact it can have in developing a business. I think in addition to capital, investors can bring expertise, and that's probably something that we could have benefited from, especially experience in retail and direct to consumer, or even the B2B side of things. But we had chosen to finance internally because we also had particular ways to do things. Something that helped with the finances of the business is we chose to do a single colorway, and we chose not to do seasons. So, which is where I think a lot of businesses, especially apparel businesses, get themselves into trouble, is you have to forecast demand. If you don't deliver it, then you need to do sales to blow gear out that you've paid for. And then it creates this horrible cycle where consumers start to expect sales and discounts on stuff, and you can never sell it at full price. I wanted a product that was just as good 6 months after we launched it, or a year after we launched it, that wasn't tied to a season. I didn't see the point of making it obsolete for the sake of selling another piece of kit. And by doing a single colorway, we could focus on function instead of pouring a bunch of resources into how do we make this in 6 colorways. That doesn't add utility. So we had made some choices that may have not been popular with everybody, but which enabled us to create something at the fairest price we could, and to build a business that had a good foundation.
These are really foundational decisions, aren't they? Like, because it allows you to do what you're doing now versus everything that other stuff creates. And yeah, you've been quite outspoken about that. I've read the culture of consumerism, the footprint you leave on the planet, sustainable business. You encourage free repairs, and like you said, you don't have new seasons every few months, and discourage impulse buying. How do you balance the nature of capitalism, or do you need to with how do you balance purpose and profit when you have what did you say, 16 employees and families are depending on you now? And is the business set up that strong that you can lead with that, and you're comfortable with that?
It's
not comfortable, but confident.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and it's absolutely a different situation when you have employees, because you do need to, we are very careful when we hire, when we decide to add someone to the team. It's because if I'm pulling someone away from another job that's quite interesting, I want to make sure that I have a job for them in the going forward, and it's going to be interesting for them, and they can feel secure in what they do. And it's probably come that burden or that sense of responsibility that we have as employers. I would say it's meant that we've hired more slowly than we would have liked, and we've always run a bit lean as a team. But the objective is that when you're hired, this is a job that is here all the time, and it does mean that we do need a minimum amount of sales, but I think we don't make the hiring decision ahead of where we're at financially, right. If that makes sense. So we're always lagging a little bit on that side. In terms of profits, I think, even as a brand and your responsibility to consumers, it's annoying if you have bought something from a brand that then goes belly up, and you can't have a warranty honored or take it back for repair. So we owe it just as much to our consumers to run our business responsibly, not excessively, but responsibly, so that we can be around. They are building trust in us, and we should be here tomorrow as well. But that also, it's the burden doesn't go away over time. It's a responsibility that increases the more stuff you do, and the faster you grow, or the more people you reach, the more responsibility you have. So we're taking that very cautiously.
Yeah, Do you feel, or it seems like you're on the cusp of, you're not small, that's for sure, and you're sort of entering that medium stage. Are there Is there an awkwardness in that? I know you don't like the term growth, but that stage of the business, because you are growing, and that does take more responsibility. And is it an awkward period of the business, or is it really really good period of the business with what you can do, and the customers you can serve, and the products you can do, and everyone who's involved?
If you'd asked me a year ago, or especially 2 years ago, I would have said it was a bit awkward. And to be honest, our team has been around the same size for the last 2 years, even though the business has grown.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's less awkward now because our team has become very strong, and there we have uh, an excellent group of people that can do things better than I can. So that takes away awkwardness. Where it was awkward was
Mm,
trying to when I try to think, try to be able to do everything myself and to think of everything myself. That was it. Just felt that there were serious limitations in terms of what we could be or how we could grow. But now I can see within the team, and we have, although we all have connections to bikes in some way, it's a very diverse team. Some people have done the transcontinental. Some people have done more recreational tours around the world. Some people just like to do a Sunday ride, and that's it. So I feel that with these varying interests and varying connections to cycling, we can reach more people. Like, it gives us the capacity to identify with and connect with what we're doing in a way that we couldn't when we were smaller or when we were organized in a slightly different way. But now I see the
right.
potential with the team that we have, that we can try more things. And a good example you'll see in a month or so, we'll be bringing some of our capabilities into a new area, which is the urban environment.
Yeah, right. How's the team sort of split up in terms of responsibility? Is it quite a typical, a few designers, a finance person, or how do you split the responsibilities of the company up, and what does that look like in your organization?
This is something that we probably haven't done very well, or haven't done in a way that is very conventional. Because it's especially when you're 16, like, we're all in the same room theoretically. We're all at home these days, but
Yeah.
before this COVID situation, we were all in the same room, and we try to encourage interaction with. Basically, you can overhear every conversation. So anyone from doing anything is going to be able to interact with, and is encouraged to interact with, someone else doing something very, very different. And I think this is essential because we can get, like, customer feedback to product instantaneously. So organizationally, yeah, we have a product team, which is about a third of the team, just a little bit less than that. Content and community. We've got operations, but no, everybody's role straddles a little bit another area of the business. So it's difficult to describe it in organizational clusters, because
Mm,
I think one of the things that makes us strong is the fact that we are small and super interconnected in this way, and that what anybody does not end at a certain point. They
yeah.
still own what we do as a business.
You still operate as a small business, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think of it as a small business, or is it like, holy man, where did this come from? Like, does it feel like it's getting big, or how does it feel
Um,
at the moment for you?
I feel it's. I still feel, or I still think of it as a small business, because that's really our mindset. And I think it's important to keep that mindset, regardless of how big we become. It will take. Um, I I'm hesitant to expand the team too much more, because I like this family connectedness we
Mm,
have within the room, and I do think that especially because we have a strong direct to consumer model, we're able to do a lot of things at the scale, whether there's, like, what we have now or five times what we have now. What does that change in terms of our individual work? There's probably more customer conversations to have, but I think we can do more within the resources that we have. And my plan is to keep the culture as it is.
With the larger brands starting to come in and identify this space as a growth space, the rackless bags in your territory, how do you see that, and how you guys fit into that? How you remain competitive, and how that landscape is changing, and how do you create a business around that?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's been interesting to see who's come into the space and how they've come into the space. On the positive side, the more people are there, the more awareness there is. And as a brand, we made we realized that we are not going to do a good job at what we do if we try to be everything to everybody. We have a very specific mission to make the product that we are proud to sell, that we would use and choose as riders. And that's not going to be the cheapest item. That's not going to be, it's something that we want built to last, built to perform. And it comes at a price, which means we can't serve everyone. So it's to the extent that we don't serve everyone, I can see there's value in other brands in the space coming in to fill the spaces that we cannot. I think, sometimes it is frustrating to have more competition, but it does also keep us on our game because our edge is not being gray or being made in London. Our edge is being innovative and having the best product out there. So we just need to keep pushing that forward. And I think we can do that better than any of the other brands, because if you look at the large, I'm going to pick on Specialized because that's probably the largest name that's come into the space. This is always going to be an add-on for them. This is not the focus for the business. So they can make something and they've got great distribution. But how much can they really pour themselves into making the best product and driving that forward? It's just not possible for them. It's just not on the radar for them. So they will be able to serve a part of the market that we may not serve as well. And likewise, on the other end of the spectrum, you can have guys doing this out of a workshop at home, or who are made in a particular place, but they're going to be limited by what capabilities they're able to bring to the table, what equipment they have, what manufacturing techniques, what R&D they're able to do. And so in my view, then there's still a spot for us because we understand the rider because we are the rider. We have tried to find a space for ourselves where we are able to focus on product innovation, complemented with some of our digital work to make the sport more inclusive, and produce a product that others just can't.
And is it safe to say you guys have really pioneered growing this category, haven't you? Like, you are quite known as the one for that. I'd argue.
I hope that's the case. I like to feel that we have made a positive contribution to the growth of the sport and to making this more accessible to a wider audience, either by the products that we make or by building awareness and making it easier for people to see themselves and doing this, helping them to get out and do this. I think there's been a lot of things in the environment, including the evolution of bikes and the rise of gravel, wider tire clearance, and so on, that have also contributed to this. The emergence of more events and races. There's just all of these things coming together.
Yeah, you've been on the forefront of it. You coming from the energy industry and that being quite male dominant, and now in the cycling industry being quite male dominant, is running your own business kind of get away with all the nonsense of possible roadblocks and things like that in your career, or Do you still find that in this industry, or how does it affect you at all?
Um, it's a difficult question. I think that I can't say it doesn't affect me at all. Because it's something that I'm conscious of. I would say personally, I I don't feel that I have had obstacles on my road through like male dominated industries because of my gender. But I don't know whether that's true or not. For me, it was always easy to stand out in finance because in a room of 30 dudes, I was the only girl. So everyone would remember who I was. And I took
Right.
that as an asset, even if they asked me for coffee. I could turn it around and say, no, I'm here just like you. um,
Yeah, yeah,
and in this industry, I haven't, I've chosen not to find the places where it is an obstacle. What surprises me, and sometimes and reminds me of my responsibility in this role, is like trying to make sure that we do our part as community members in ensuring proper representation of not just women but other underrepresented groups. Because I'm the thing I do feel as a woman is that um, role models make a big difference, and you could see this like. Since I'm Canadian, I have to talk about hockey, like women's hockey. You can
let's go
see
there.
the impact of the women's hockey team
Oh yeah,
on the number of women in the sport now. So I know that having
absolutely.
female role models matters, and so I think it's something that we are working toward, trying to get better representation. And again, not just women, but like
Mm,
changing the landscape through how we represent people in the images that we have on our website and the things that we
yeah.
do, the athletes we support, the races and events that we support, and how they deal with representation. And it's surprising to me sometimes when we're interviewing new team members and they're like, "Oh, it's company is run by a woman." I like we don't make a point
You
to
don't think of
emphasize
yourself
that.
like that.
Pardon me?
Yeah. You don't think of yourself like that.
No, I don't
Yeah.
necessarily. I don't think it is a particularly special thing, but it's potentially something that we should talk about because maybe there's a perception that everything, like all of these companies, are owned and run by women. But it's not the case. It's just not something that we've chosen to emphasize. It doesn't mean we have a
Yeah.
better product. Do you know what I mean? It's again like
Yeah.
sometimes we're so focused on the things that we make that we forget that there's other elements of what we do and who we are that may be
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. 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 I get it. The other thing I wanted to, I guess, bring up because it would have hit, close to home for you. In 2017 in the Indy Pack, when one of your ambassadors, Mike Hall, was tragically killed in a car. How did that affect, I guess, the people in the business and the way you maybe think about how you want to inspire that type of riding and the community around that? And I'm not saying that you guys had anything to do with being responsible for that, but it would have hit close to home, I imagine.
Yeah, for sure. I can still remember the morning I woke up, looking at my phone, which is the first thing I do every morning,
Yeah.
and I couldn't believe my eyes. I just at the time it wasn't confirmed yet. There was just the his dot stopped, and I mean I think it was just this sinking feeling of realizing that this was not going to be good news.
Yeah.
Um, the sad the sad reality is that it's dangerous to share the road with cars. As cyclists out on the road, we are always there's always this danger. It's present danger. There's a big difference in terms of what's happening in a car and this controlled environment, and particularly at specific times of day. The dangers can be even higher. Um, And I think for us, it was a big loss because Mike was not just an amazing rider, but he was also a really active community member and played a huge role in shaping the sport. Having created the Transcontinental bike race, I think he took bikepacking to a new level. It just there was so much excitement and promise about what he was going to do with sport, just as an individual. But I guess the event itself, for the impact it had for us was in terms of how we thought about what messages we send, and by what we do and what we create. So with races, safety has become a sort of must-have when we support a race or get involved in that way. There needs to be some sort of safety parameter, and there's only so much a race organizer can do. But there are events that have made this a priority, either by trying to work on visibility, forced rests, or to take out the race component of it altogether, so people can ride hard but are not so fixated on the clock. I guess the other thing is we came out with a series of products about a year and a half after Mike's accident, that where visibility was a main feature of it. So it's probably bubbled to the surface the importance of safety. It serves as a constant reminder for us because he was such a close friend of the brand, that this needs to be something that we're always thinking about in the things that we do, whether it's communication to help riders be safer, whether it's supporting races that are advocating and doing the right actions to help riders. And yeah.
Yeah. No, it's just, you guys are so essential to that community, involved in that community. And he was an ambassador of yours and so well known. And I guess there must have been lasting impact on how you go forward with that community and how those races evolve because of this and everything. Because it's, a lot of this stuff is dangerous.
Definitely. I don't want to dismiss the role or not recognize that a race situation can present dangers that don't happen in everyday life. But I think that it's also important that we recognize that when cars and bikes share the road, whether or not we're in a race situation, that's a big danger. And so I think we shouldn't think of it in a race situation alone. Anyway, the lessons that we can take from it, and in terms of how we make ourselves visible or advocate for awareness with drivers.
Yeah. I think it's pushing a lot of people to gravel roads and paths and stuff. It certainly has for me. And I think as you know too, at the stage of life where you start having kids, the consequences become a lot higher and you start thinking about these things, right? So, but at the same time, I have never looked at Apidura pack so closely and it considered things like this. So it could be an outcome for, that category that's positive, that, a new type of riding is developing maybe. I don't think I have any more questions. Maybe the last question is, how is having your kids affected your day-to-day life in the business, and maybe your thought on what's next for the company, for the products?
I would say that starting a family and building a business at the same time has some serious challenges. I mentioned earlier that we were maybe a bit behind in building the team at pace with the business. To give you a sense of this, after I had my second child, I was back in the office after 4 days. So for 6 months here, it was mostly standing with her in a sling.
Wow.
It's just the nature of having a lean team, but also we're very involved as owners and in everything that we do. So it's hard to separate family and the business. It's definitely a quite intense period to have two toddlers and also be so involved on a day-to-day basis with what we're doing here.
I don't imagine you're doing a month-long bike ride anywhere these days.
No, the last epic one we did was for our honeymoon in Iran. So I'm itching to get out again, but I think we're getting close because the youngest one is 2.5 years old. And one thing that has inspired us to do is we put out a guide to help families get started and get their kids out, so you don't feel like the adventure's over once you have kids. We've got a type packing guide, and we actually did a collaboration with Bomb Track almost a year ago. It was a little bit behind, but for a junior bike that they were making. So there's some bike packing gear designed for a smaller rider. And I think that family focus is directly tied to the struggle I've felt of how difficult it is to get back into it. It's one thing to go out on your own for indefinite ride, knowing that you can be hungry or thirsty for a long period of time and you'll make it work. But when you have a toddler with you, you don't have the luxury to say, just suffer through it. Just suffer for the next 2 hours.
That's hilarious. Cool. Well, I've taken up, an hour and a half of your time, Tori, and this has been awesome. Thank you for sharing your story.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Wade. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you. All right. Take care, Tori. I'm Wade Wallace, and thanks for listening to another episode of Overnight Success. If you have suggestions on a remarkable entrepreneurial story within the cycling industry, hit me up on our members Discord channel where I'd love to hear about it. Until next time, stay inspired and stay tuned for our next episode.